By the year 2001, the spotlight had officially shifted. The gaming public had moved on to the promises of the next generation, losing their minds over the sleek curves of the PlayStation 2 and the raw, anti-aliased power of a new era. The original grey box was no longer the cutting-edge pioneer dominating the cultural conversation. It was the old guard, quietly tucked away in the lower shelves of the department store, sitting in shrink-wrap budget cases. But for the developers who stayed behind, something incredible was happening. The PlayStation 1 was a completely solved puzzle. The jagged, vibrating textures that defined our early journeys in the Index had been tamed. The erratic, nauseating cameras of the mid-90s were a distant memory. The industry had spent nearly 7 years mastering every single microscopic quirk of the 32-bit architecture, and in its twilight years it wasn't walking off the stage, it was performing a masterclass. And nowhere is that twilight wizardry more fascinating than the final chapter of the Magic Kingdom. We've tracked this relationship from its very inception. In the early years, there was a profound distance, that quiet realisation that while the console was growing up, getting edgy, leaning into survival horror, Disney was staying firmly in the safe end of the pool, acting as a digital babysitter. Then came the grand convergence, the moment where the technical execution finally caught up with the cinematic ambition, proving that a licensed title could stand toe-to-toe with the platform's heavy hitters. By the turn of the millennium, it became a multi-genre explosion of absolute dominance, pushing the aging hardware to its absolute structural limits. Today, we are entering the absolute endgame. This is an 8-game gauntlet spanning from 2001 all the way to 2004. This is the era of the visual compression, interface trickery and hardware-defining optimization. We are going to look at developers using advanced rendering workarounds to trick our brains into thinking we are looking at 6th generation software. We will watch Aladdin in Nasira's revenge completely abandon the safe, structured paths of the past to build massive sweeping 3D worlds. We'll see Atlantis, the Lost Empire, embrace a highly stylized comic book aesthetic to circumvent the low polygon limits. And of course, we are going to dive straight into the surreal, chaotic fringe of the late era library, from the blistering, hyper-optimised kart racing of Toy Story Racer to the absolute unhinged fever dream of Disney characters dancing to high-tempo Eurobeat in the twilight of the system's lifespan. The original PlayStation was putting up its final numbers, and while we look forward, it's time to open the final vault, look past the corporate logos, and appreciate the absolute craft of a console's final victory lap. The gate is closing, but the magic isn't done yet. Welcome to the PSX Index. I'm Parasine, and this is the show where I play and document all 1,278 PS1 games released across Northern America, and this episode is Index entry 227 to 234. Crossing past this specific market in the project brings with a very strange, almost melancholic shift in perspective. When we first started this archive, the year 2001 felt like a mythical finish line. It's a year where the industry's landscape looked completely different. If you walked into a game shop in 2001, the energy was entirely focused on what was next. The original PlayStation was rapidly being repositioned as the entry-level console, the machine you bought for a younger sibling, or the system you kept in the bedroom while the main television was hooked up to the future. Yet, look at the sheer volume of software still shifting units on the classic grey plastic. The user base was massive, numbering in tens of millions, and that meant publishers couldn't just walk away from the cash cow, but instead of the lazy, low-effort cash-ins you might expect from the dying platform, the titles we are covering today represent some of the most polished, technically sound pieces of software to ever get stamped onto a black-bottom disc. In our first bundle, we analysed the cautious defensive posture of a corporate giant trying to find its bearings in a three-dimensional landscape. In the second, we saw the definitive mechanical breakdown where titles like Tarzan and Toy Story 2 shattered the stereotype of the mediocre movie tie-in. In the third, we stood in awe of a 10-game marathon that showed just how versatile the system could be when pushed by veteran dev teams. Nearing to the final chapter is an entirely different exercise. This is the story of survival, clever optimization and architectural wizardry. We have 8 games on the docket, stretching across the final twilight of the platform's active retail life. We are going to look at the evolution of the 3D platformer, the artistic pivots used to beat the hardware's limitations, and the bizarre genre experiments that could only exist when a console's rules have been completely rewritten. We've got a lot of history to unpack and some of the cleanest pixels of the generation to look at. Let's get to work. To truly understand how the design philosophy of a licensed platformer shifted as the console aged, you have to look directly at the heavy hitters of this final block. Aladdin in Nasira's Revenge, The Lion King Simba's Mighty Adventure, and Monsters Inc. Scream Team. When you look back at Tarzan in 1999, Eurocom achieved visual greatness by making a compromise. They locked the player to a strict 2.5D path, allowing them to cram the background environments with dense, beautiful geometry without tanking the frame rate. It was a brilliant calculated trick, but by 2001, developers were done compromising. They wanted full, unadulterated 3D traversal, and they wanted it to look seamless. Aladdin in Nasira's Revenge, developed by Argonaut Games, is a fascinating look at the transition. Argonaut wasn't just a studio that guessed, they were the technical minds behind Star Fox, Croc and Alien Resurrection. When you look at the reigns of Agrabah, they didn't just build a safe side-scroller, they built a fully realised 3-dimensional sandbox that managed to completely eradicate the classic PlayStation 1 texture warping. The streets of Agrabah, the shifting desert sands and the ancient ruins feel solid. When you move the camera, the world doesn't just jitter and tear at the seams, it holds its form with the stability that would have been unimaginable during the console's launch window. Then you look at The Lion King Simba's Mighty Adventure. This game attempts something incredibly bold. It tries to bridge the narrative gap between the original film and its sequel, tracking Simba from a vulnerable cub to the adult king. From a game design standpoint, this structural split changes how you interact with the environment. As a cub, the gameplay focuses on classic nimble platforming, dodging hazards and running away from stampedes. When Simba grows up into an adult, the mechanics pivot towards weight, power and physical combat. The developers at Paradox Development managed to tune the physics engine so that the transition feels tangible. Adult Simba has momentum, his jumps feel heavier, his strikes land with environmental impact, and the engine handles these shifting mass parameters without dropping a single frame. Finally, Monsters Inc. Scream Team, handled by artificial mind and movement, shows the absolute peak of late-era character rendering, squeezing the blocky mechanical geometry of the PlayStation 1 to represent the organic, fluid and fair-covered designs of a Pixar film sounds like an exercise in futility. Yet through incredible vertex colouring and highly clever polygon budget allocation, Sully and Mike look remarkably accurate to their cinematic counterparts. The levels are designed around massive corporate training simulation rooms that act as mini open worlds, filled with environmental puzzles, vertical platform challenges and intricate collection loops. These 3 games represent the absolute refinement of the genre. They didn't just invent new mechanics, they simply took the established rules of the 3D platformer and polished them until they gleamed, proving that the original PlayStation could still deliver a premium blockbuster experience even if its successor was dominating the market.
I am honored to present you both with these bronze medals to commemorate your achievement. Congratulations to you both.
While the platform and trio focused on refining the traditional 3D dimensional space, Atlantis: The Lost Empire, released in mid-2001, decided to take a completely different approach to the visual limitations of the 32-bit era. It represents what some like to call the Michelangelo phase of late-era development, the point where the artist realised that if you cannot increase the number of polygons on screen, you must make the existing polygons look like a work of art. The film itself was a massive departure for Disney, ditching the soft, rounded musical numbers for a sharp, angular pulp adventure aesthetic heavily influenced by comic legend Mike Nigola. For a standard console, translating that style would be a challenge, but for the PlayStation 1, a system that fundamentally excelled at drawing sharp lines and flat triangles, it was a match made in heaven. Eurocom took the development duties here, and the execution is nothing short of masterful. Instead of fighting against the console's ability to render smooth, rounded curves, they leaned directly into the hardware's natural geometry. They built a world entirely out of sharp angles, high contrast shadows, and dynamic atmospheric lighting. The subterranean caverns, the ancient submarine docks, and the glowing neon blue ruins of Atlantis don't look like compromised versions of a movie. They look like a comic book brought to life inside a 32-bit engine. Mechanically, Atlantis is an absolute chameleon. It refuses to stay in one lane. You are constantly swapping between a wide roster of characters from the expedition team, each completely altering the gameplay loop. 1 minute you are playing as Milo, navigating classic puzzle platforming environments and utilising ancient technology. The next, you are controlling Vinny, planting explosives to breach massive rock walls, or playing as Audrey to repair complex machinery under a strict time limit. What makes Atlantis stand out so profoundly in this late era lineup is its incredible sense of environmental scale. It's a masterclass in art direction over brute force. It proved that when a development team stops chasing the mirage of a raw technical power and instead focuses on cohesive stylized art design, they can create an experience that remains visually striking decades after the hardware is turned to dust.
No answer.
When you reach the absolute fringes of a console's lifespan, the corporate boundaries begin to blur in ways that are deeply fascinating to document. This is where we run into the absolute goldmines of dry humour and surreal imagery within the 8-game block. Titles that could only exist in a world where the system's software library was so vast and its audience so diverse that publishers were willing to throw completely unhinged ideas at the wall just to see what stuck. Let's begin with Goofy's Funhouse, released in late 2001. On paper, this sounds like a standard, completely forgettable education title designed to keep a toddler occupied for 20 minutes. In reality, it is one of the most surreal, atmospheric and oddly hypnotic experiences on the entire platform. The premise is deceptively simple. Goofy has left us out, and you must navigate the various rooms to find missing items, albums, photographs, and unlock Disney's animated shorts. But the actual environmental design feels less like a cheerful cartoon and more like a family-friendly imitation of Resident Evil. You are dropped into a completely silent, multi-room mansion. There is no background music playing as you explore, only the heavy, rhythmic thwack of Goofy's oversized shoes echoing against the wooden floorboards. You wander through empty hallways, into dark basements, and across static, liminal kitchens, interacting with household appliances to trigger sudden, silent animations. It is a game wrapped in an almost dreamlike state of domestic isolation, providing a deadpan comedic contrast that makes it impossible to tear your eyes away from the screen. Then we pivot to Pooh's Party Game, or Party Time for our international viewers, released in 2001. Following the massive industry-wide success of Mario Party, every single intellectual property on the planet was mandated to receive a digital board game adaptation, but taking the gentle, slow-paced, honey-soaked atmosphere of the 100-acre woods and injecting it with the hyper-aggressive, friendship-ruining competitive tension of a party game is an incredible creative friction. You choose your character, whether it's Pooh, Piglet, Tigger or Eeyore, and proceed to engage in intense, reflex-driven minigames that reward you for ruthlessly sabotaging your childhood friends. Watching a low polygon, perfectly animated Eeyore deadpan into the camera after executing a flawless, high-speed tactical maneuver to steal a collection of acorns from a crying piglet is the exact kind of pure, unadulterated comedic gold that makes this entire preservation project worth the hours of footage capture. It is a game that takes itself entirely seriously, delivering a mechanically tight, highly competitive multiplayer experience wrapped in an aesthetic that screams absolute innocence. These games are beautiful anomalies of the late era library, moments where the traditional corporate formulas collapsed into something genuinely strange, unique, and endlessly entertaining to dissect.
Oh, Pooh Bear, wake up! You've eaten all my honey!
I did. Oh, bother. It must have been a dream.
A dream?
If the surreal experiments of the late era library showed a willingness to break thematic rules, Toy Story Racer, released in March 2001, shows a development team completely rewriting the technical rulebooks of the console. Developed by Traveller's Tales, the very same studio that laid down the groundwork for the platforming renaissance with Toy Story 2, this game stands as an absolute, undeniable technical anomaly. By 2001, the kart racer genre on the PlayStation 1 was structured wasteland. The market had been completely conquered by Crash Team Racing and Mario Kart 64, and the clearance bins were overflowing with terrible budget-tier clones that couldn't handle basic physics or maintain a stable frame rate without looking like a mosaic of pixelated garbage. Entering a licensed kart racer into this environment at the dawn of the PlayStation 2 era should have been a commercial suicide note. Instead, Traveller's Tales delivered a mechanical masterpiece that ranks as one of the best looking and smoothest platforming racing titles on the entire architecture. The secret lies within the engine's optimization. Toy Story Racer manages to squeeze an astronomical amount of visual detail out of the 32-bit chip. The tracks aren't flat, uninspired corridors. They are dense, multi-layer environments that perfectly capture the toy-scale perspective of the franchise. You are racing through the crowded aisles of Al's Toy Barn, speeding beneath the massive wheels of moving vehicles in a suburban street, and navigating the winding vertical staircases of Andy's house. The geometry is incredibly sharp, the texture filtering is remarkably clean, and the game manages to render multiple high polygon character races on screen simultaneously without dropping a single frame below its locked target. The handling model is exceptionally tight, favouring high-speed drift mechanics, precise defensive item management, and complex shortcut exploration that rewards genuine mechanical mastery. But what truly elevates Toy Story Racer into the upper tier of the late-era software is its sheer, unapologetic depth. This isn't a simple free cup tournament that you can breeze through in an afternoon. This game features an incredibly massive, Matrix-style challenge mode consisting of over 100 unique events. You are constantly unlocking new characters, ranging from flagship heroes like Woody and Buzz to deep-cut roster additions like the Green Army Men, Mr. Potato Head, and even the RC race car itself, each paired with distinct stat attributes and specific challenge parameters. It is a game that flatly refused to play down its target audience. It treated the Toy Story license with absolute design respect, delivering a vigorously visually stunning and content-rich experience that stands as the definitive momentum to what the original PlayStation could achieve when pushed by a team of veteran masters at the absolute height of their engineering powers. Just when you think you have fully mapped out the boundaries of what this late-era Disney library has to offer, you hit Dance Dance Revolution Disney Mix. Released in late 2001, it is the absolute zenith of the year 2001 energy, a cultural collision so loud, so frantic, and so unapologetically bizarre that it demands your full, undivided attention. In the early 2000s, the rhythmic game phenomenon was completely sweeping the globe, and Konami's Dance Dance Revolution was the undisputed king of the arcade floor. It was loud, intense, and defined by high-tempo Japanese electronic music, flashing strobe lights, and intense physical endurance. On the other side of the cultural spectrum, you had the timeless, orchestral, and carefully protected musical legacy of Walt Disney. The idea of smashing these two completely opposing forces together into a single 32-bit PlayStation disc sounds like a corporate fever dream cooked up in a boardroom after too many energy drinks. Yet the result is an absolute masterclass in pure, unadulterated arcade joy. The gameplay engine is untouched Konami perfection, the arrow inputs are precise, the timing windows are razor sharp, and the difficulty scaling climbs from a gentle, family-friendly walk to the absolute finger-blistering, pad-ruining chaos that seasoned rhythm game veterans craved. but it's the presentation that elevates this into a legendary piece of late-era software archive. You are watching low polygon 3D models of Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck and Goofy executing highly synchronized, remarkably fluid hip-hop and breakdance routines against flashing, psychedelic, neon-drenched background visualizers. The track list is an incredible collection of absolute bangers. Traditional historic Disney melodies like It's a Small World, Zip-Dee-Doo-Dah and Mickey Mouse Club March are stripped of their orchestral arrangements and completely rebuilt from the ground up as a high-tempo 4-on-4 Eurobeat techno and hyper-pop tracks. It is an absolute sensory assault. Sitting there with a DualShock controller, sweating over a high-speed stream of incoming arrow inputs while a digital remix of The Little Mermaid's Under the Sea blasts through your speakers at 160 beats per minute, you realise that the traditional safe distance we analysed all the way back in part 1 was not just vanished, it was completely obliterated by the wall of electronic sound. It is a game that represents the absolute freedom of a console's final years. A moment where the rules were completely thrown out the window and the developers were allowed to create something beautifully chaotic, mechanically flawless and endlessly fun. To look back at this massive 8-game gauntlet is to look at a historical artifact that completely defines how we view the longevity of consumer technology. We are talking about Disney's party game, or the late-era educational titles that quietly trickled onto our systems all the way up to the mid-2000s. Think about the timeline for a moment. By the time the final software shipments were being stamped onto black-bottom discs, the PlayStation 2 had already been on the market for years. The Nintendo GameCube and the original Xbox were fully established. The industry was already talking about high-definition displays, online networking, and massive cinematic open worlds. The original 32-bit architecture was ancient history to the gaming press, a relic of a bygone era before the turn of the millennium. Yet the original grey box refused to die, and it didn't survive through the lack of options. It survived because it transitioned into a vital, working class piece of domestic infrastructure. For millions of families around the globe, especially the working class communities, jumping onto the next generation hardware train the moment the new console launches isn't a financial reality. The original PlayStation became the great equaliser. It was affordable, the hardware was incredibly resilient, and the pre-existing software library was a massive mountain of content. Publishers recognised this specific demographic dynamic, and their late-era strategy shifted towards creating highly polished, accessible, and affordable titles designed to serve as the perfect entry point for a completely new generation of younger players. When you sit down to look at these final releases through the analytical lens of archival preservation, the level of technical responsibility on display is deeply impressive. These weren't broken, lazy, unplayable pieces of code rushed out to scam unsuspecting parents at a clearance rack. The physics engines are stable, the user interfaces are clean and intuitive, the voice acting is fully produced, and the visual assets utilise every single optimisation trick discovered over a decade of active development to ensure that the game looks bright, sharp, and running beautifully on a standard television. It is a reminder of what this Index project is truly about. We aren't just documenting the multi-million-dollar flagship blockbusters that get massive retrospectives every 5 years. We are documenting the entire life cycle of a cultural phenomenon. These late-era titles represent the quiet, industrious conclusion to an era, the final baseline of quality for a console that had given everything it could to the medium. They show a platform that had completely outlived its expected exploration date, transforming from a cutting-edge pioneer into a reliable, trusted domestic companion that continued to deliver genuine entertainment to the very end of its days. Watching the credits roll on this 2001 block of Disney library shows just how much things changed. When we started this specific marathon back in episode 18, there was a massive distance between the platform and the Magic Kingdom. It felt like Disney was staying safely in the shadow end of the pool. But looking back now, this isn't the whole story. Disney didn't just stay in their lane, they mastered the hardware. They took an aging, primitive piece of mid-90s silicon and squeezed every drop of magic out of it. From the rock-solid 3D streets of Agrabah to the incredible optimization of Toy Story Racer, they proved a licensed game could be a technical benchmark. They turned the sunset of the PlayStation 1 into a triumphant showcase. We've survived the worst of the clearance bins, documented the earlier historical missteps, and conquered the peak of the 2001 licensed library. 234 games down, 1044 to go. The reality of running a massive archival project like the Index is that the modern algorithms aren't built for long-form history. They want creators to stick in a single lane. Like permanent survival horror or retro sports, the system doesn't understand a show that jumps from quiet hallways of Goofy's fun house to a massive 4-disc role-playing epic. But this channel is a permanent monument to the entire PlayStation legacy. To keep pushing forward, the Index relies entirely on your support. Right now, a huge number of you watching aren't actually subscribed. That means you're running the risk of losing the channel in the digital noise. If you want to see every single North American PlayStation 1 game preserved and analysed to this level of respect, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment with your own memories of the console's final years. You can also click a playlist on your screen to see how far we've come. Next time on the PSX Index, we're leaving the bright palettes and family-friendly soundtracks completely behind. We are moving from the simple kart races straight into one of the most complex, deep, and ambitious milestones in gaming history. Get ready for a massive space opera that questions the very nature of identity and existence. Xenogears. The gears are turning, and the scope is about to become overwhelming. I'll see you there.